The slap came out of nowhere. A sharp crack, cutting through the soft hum of the airplane cabin. Jaden Carter barely had time to react before the sting spread across his face. A hush fell over first class. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Linda Monroe, the flight attendant, stood above him, her chest rising and falling in controlled rage. "You do not speak to me like that," she hissed. Jaden blinked, his mind racing. His jaw clenched. His fingers curled into his jeans. A uniformed officer was already moving down the aisle. White, tall, expression unreadable. Jaden had seen this scene before. Played out in stores, on sidewalks, in school hallways. He knew what happened next. He could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on him. The quiet accusation in every stare. And then, before anyone could take another step, a voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Did you just put your hands on my son?" The cabin air seemed to shift, power rearranging itself. Jaden didn't even need to turn around. His mother had arrived. Before we get into what led up to this moment, before the slap, before the humiliation, let's talk about Jaden Carter. Who he is, where he comes from, and why, no matter how high he climbs, the world still tries to bring him down. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started. Jaden Carter slouched in his first-class seat, arms crossed, head tilted against the window. The city lights below blurred as the plane ascended. He exhaled slowly, watching the world shrink beneath him. He had the best seat in the cabin. Spacious, private, comfortable, and he hated every second of it. His mother, Vanessa Carter, had insisted he fly first class. Not that she asked. Vanessa never asked. She just booked the ticket, texted the confirmation, and expected him to go along with it. Jaden got it. His mom worked hard to build the life they had. CEO of one of the biggest airline companies in the country. She wanted him to experience the comfort she never had growing up. But he didn't need this. He didn't need the stairs. Because no matter how much money his mother had, or how nice his seat was, people still looked at him like he didn't belong. Jaden kept his hoodie up, headphones in, trying to disappear into the music. If he stayed quiet, if he didn't attract attention, maybe this flight would just pass by without incident. Maybe, for once, he could just exist without proving himself. He sank deeper into his seat, eyes closed, hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. He just wanted to get to New York. Jaden had almost convinced himself this flight would be normal. The hum of the engines, the faint scent of coffee and leather, the quiet murmur of first-class passengers wrapped in their own little worlds. He kept his hoodie up, headphones in, body still. The goal was simple: blend in. Don't give anyone a reason to look twice. And then she arrived. Linda Monroe. She moved through the aisle with sharp, practiced strides. Mid-40s. Blonde hair wound so tight it looked painful. The kind of woman whose entire personality lived in the fine print of airline policy. She stopped at Jaden's seat, eyes scanning, not just at him, but through him. "Excuse me, sir," she said, clipped and professional. "I need to see your ticket." Jaden blinked, pulling out an earbud. "I already showed it at boarding." Her smile was thin. "I understand, but I need to verify it again." Jaden sighed, pulled up his phone, and turned the screen toward her. Seat 3A. First class. Confirmed. Linda didn't lean in to look, just stared for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded stiffly. "Thank you," she said, but her tone sounded more like "you got lucky." Jaden slid his phone back into his pocket. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Minutes passed. Linda moved effortlessly through the cabin, pouring wine into crystal glasses, exchanging warm laughs with passengers. A man in a suit barely looked up as she refilled his drink without him asking. A woman asked for extra ice, and Linda smiled like she had been waiting all day for that request. But when she passed Jaden's seat, her gaze skimmed right over him. He waited, and waited. When she circled back, he lifted a hand slightly. "Excuse me." Linda's head snapped in his direction, her expression already shifting to irritation. "I'll be with you when I can." Jaden's fingers curled into his lap. He glanced around. Everyone else had drinks. Even the guy in the row behind him, who had just sat down 10 minutes ago, held a cold glass of water. "All I asked for was some water," Jaden said, keeping his voice steady. Linda's eyes narrowed. "And I said I'll get to you when I can." Jaden exhaled through his nose. He wasn't looking for a fight. He just wanted the same treatment as everyone else. So why did it feel like the entire cabin was watching him now? He felt the weight of their stares. Waiting. Expecting. Jaden straightened in his seat. Is there a reason I'm being treated differently? Linda let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Excuse me. You heard me, Jaden said, his voice still calm. Linda's jaw tightened. A flicker of something dark flashed across her face. And then, before Jaden could even register what was happening, her hand lashed out. A slap. Hard. Quick. Final. Jaden's head snapped slightly to the side. The sting spread across his cheek like wildfire. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Glasses paused midair. Newspapers lowered. For the first time, everyone was looking. Jaden sat frozen. His heart pounded. Not from pain. From disbelief. Linda Monroe straightened her uniform, lips pursed. You do not speak to me like that, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Jaden's jaw locked. His fingers twitched. The air shifted. A security officer was already moving toward him. White. Tall. Built like a wall. His hand rested on his belt, hovering, deciding. Jaden knew what came next. The slap still burned on Jaden's cheek, but the real sting came from the silence that followed. No one moved. No one spoke. The hush in the cabin was suffocating. He could feel the stares pressing down on him. Wide eyes. Lips slightly parted. People frozen mid-sip, mid-sentence. The businessman across the aisle gripped his newspaper a little tighter. The woman in the front row shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by the ice in her glass. But no one said a word. Not one person. Jaden's breath came slow and steady, but his pulse was anything but. His fingers curled into his hoodie, knuckles turning white. Not because of pain, because of what came next. Linda Monroe exhaled sharply, adjusting the sleeve of her crisp uniform as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just put her hands on him. As if she hadn't just done the one thing that should have ended her career on the spot. Instead, she turned, locking eyes with a flight security officer standing near the cockpit. Get him out of here, she ordered. The officer hesitated only for a second before stepping forward. A white man, built like a linebacker. Face unreadable. His hand rested on his belt, not reaching, but close enough to be a warning. Jaden had seen this scene play out before. Maybe not in an airplane, but in stores, on sidewalks, outside restaurants. Black kid. White authority figure. A crowd watching, waiting, expecting a reaction. He knew exactly what they were thinking. This is about to get ugly. He better not make a scene. What did he do to deserve it? Jaden's stomach twisted. The worst part wasn't the slap. It wasn't even Linda's voice, laced with venom, treating him like an intruder in a seat his mother paid for. The worst part was the silence. The quiet approval of people who would rather pretend this wasn't happening. Linda crossed her arms, her lips pressing into a thin, smug line. I gave you more than enough chances to behave. You're disturbing the other passengers. Jaden stared at her. Disturbing the other passengers? He had barely spoken. He had asked for water. He had simply existed in a space she thought he didn't deserve. And now, he was the problem. Jaden's throat felt tight, but he refused to let it show. He wasn't about to give her, or anyone else, the reaction they were expecting. He sat there, jaw locked, expression unreadable. The security officer loomed over him now. Sir, you need to come with me. Not please come with me. Not let's talk about this. Just you need to come. Jaden swallowed the heat rising in his chest. He could fight this, argue, demand justice. But he knew what happened to black boys who talked back. He knew how quickly things could escalate. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Slowly, he moved to unbuckle his seatbelt, his hands steady even though his heart wasn't. He was seconds away from standing, from letting them win. And then, did you just put your hands on my son? A voice, sharp as glass, sliced through the tension. Jaden didn't even have to turn. He already knew. The air inside the cabin changed. The security officer froze mid-step. The passengers who had been so quiet suddenly found themselves paying very close attention. Linda's face drained of color. Because standing in the aisle, unmoving, unshaken, and absolutely furious, was Vanessa Carter. The air inside the cabin had changed. A second ago, Linda Monroe stood tall, her expression tight with authority, her voice sharp and commanding. But now she was frozen in place, her power slipping through her fingers like sand. Because the woman standing in the aisle wasn't just any passenger. Vanessa Carter. A name that carried weight. A woman dressed in an immaculate, tailored business suit, black, sleek, powerful. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to announce who she was. The way she stood, the way she locked eyes with Linda, told everyone in that cabin exactly who held control now. Jaden sat still, the sting of humiliation still raw on his skin, but a different kind of heat spread through his chest now. His mother wasn't just here. She was here to end this. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, but her voice was ice. Did you just put your hands on my son? The words hung in the air. Linda's mouth opened, then closed. Passengers who had spent the last 5 minutes pretending not to see suddenly looked up, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The businessman with the newspaper cleared his throat. The woman with the diamond ring stopped swirling her wine. Nobody wanted to be caught on the wrong side of this moment. Linda Monroe, who had moments ago been so sure of herself, so sure of her place in this cabin, so sure that nobody would challenge her, took a step back. She started, voice cracking. She swallowed, squared her shoulders, tried again. There was a misunderstanding. Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. A misunderstanding, she echoed, slow, deliberate. Jaden could hear the steel beneath his mother's tone. Vanessa Carter had built an empire. She had clawed her way through corporate spaces where people like Linda had tried to keep her out. She had smiled through boardrooms where she wasn't wanted. She had sat at tables where men twice as privileged had underestimated her. And now, this woman, this flight attendant, had dared to put her hands on her son? Vanessa took a slow step forward. Tell me, Ms. Monroe, she continued, voice still dangerously calm, when you looked at my son, sitting in his assigned first-class seat, what exactly made you assume he didn't belong? Linda's breath hitched. I didn't assume anything. I just needed to check his ticket. Twice, Vanessa reminded her. While the other passengers were served drinks and greeted with smiles, you made him prove, twice, that he deserved to be here. Why? Linda's face burned red. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And when he asked for water, Vanessa continued, her voice never rising, never faltering. You ignored him. When he asked again, you accused him of being disrespectful. And then you put your hands on him. A murmur spread through the cabin. A ripple of discomfort. Because the truth had been spoken. No way to twist it now. No way to disguise it as policy or miscommunication. It was what it was. Jaden sat still, his heart hammering, watching Linda struggle for words. He should have felt satisfied, maybe even smug. But all he felt was exhaustion. Because he knew, this moment wasn't just about Linda. It was about every security guard that followed him in stores. Every teacher who assumed he was trouble before he spoke. Every woman who clutched her purse when he walked by. Linda Monroe was just one piece of a much bigger problem. And that's why, when his mother's sharp voice cut through the silence once more, he stopped her. Mom. The word was quiet, but firm. Vanessa turned, her expression softening just slightly when she looked at him. Jaden exhaled, his fists unclenched. He could let his mother destroy Linda Monroe. He knew she would, without hesitation. He could let this woman be fired, disgraced, thrown into the public eye as an example. And maybe that would be justice. But it wouldn't fix anything. Because tomorrow, there would be another Linda Monroe. Another flight. Another assumption. Another black kid sitting in first class, being told he didn't belong. So Jaden made a choice. He sat up straighter. He met his mother's eyes. And he spoke. I don't want her fired, he said. Linda's shoulders sagged in relief for half a second, until Jaden added, not yet. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Jaden turned, looking at Linda now. For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked small. I don't want an apology, he said. I don't care about words. Linda swallowed. What I want, Jaden continued, his voice steady, is for everyone to see this. To understand why it happened. I want an official investigation. A company-wide review on how staff handles racial bias. Linda's face twisted slightly, like she wanted to argue but knew she couldn't. Jaden glanced around the cabin, at the people who had watched but said nothing. I want everyone here to ask themselves why they didn't say anything, he said, scanning their faces. Why they only started paying attention when my mother showed up. Why it took power, not fairness, to make you care. Uneasy shifting. Avoided eye contact. A businessman cleared his throat. A woman looked down at her lap. Jaden turned back to Linda. You don't just get fired and move on, he said. You go through training. You sit through this investigation. You face this for what it is, not a mistake, but a pattern. And if you can't admit that, then yeah, you lose your job. Linda's lips pressed together. She had no defense. Vanessa studied her son for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she nodded. Justice isn't just about punishment, she said. It's about making sure this never happens again. She turned back to Linda. You will cooperate with the review, she said, her voice carrying no room for argument. This airline will release an official statement. We will be investigating every complaint filed against staff members who have treated passengers unfairly. And you, she exhaled sharply, eyes locking on to Linda's, you will be the first to sit through our new racial bias training program. Linda gave a weak nod. She had no other choice. The weight in Jaden's chest lifted, just a little. It wasn't over. It would never really be over. But for the first time in a long time, Jaden felt like he hadn't just won. He had changed something. And that was real justice. The world didn't just hear about what happened on that flight. They saw it. The slap. The silence. The power shift. A passenger had recorded everything. The way Linda Monroe's hand had struck Jaden's face. The way she had tried to have him removed. The way Vanessa Carter had turned the entire room against her with nothing but the truth. By the time the plane landed, the video was everywhere. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. Rage. Disgust. A reckoning. This is what we mean when we talk about privilege. She had no problem slapping him because she thought she'd get away with it. The scariest part? Nobody spoke up until his mother arrived. The backlash was instant. The airline released a statement before Vanessa even had to make the call. They didn't just apologize. They promised action. Linda Monroe was fired within 24 hours. But that wasn't enough. Because Vanessa Carter didn't believe in burying the problem. She believed in fixing it. So when she announced the company's new racial bias training program, she made sure everyone knew whose idea it was. Jaden's. Because this wasn't just about Linda. This was about the system that let people like her operate unchecked. And that was going to change. Jaden had spent his whole life avoiding the spotlight, blending in, keeping his head down, trying to move through the world without making waves. But that wasn't who he was anymore. This moment, his moment, had shown him something. His voice wasn't just something to protect. It was something to use. So when media outlets started reaching out, asking for interviews, asking for his side of the story, he didn't ignore them. He spoke, not just about Linda, not just about the slap, about the bigger picture, about the thousands of kids like him who had been humiliated, doubted, dismissed, not by one person, but by an entire system built to make them feel small. He talked about how silence is complicity, how every person on that plane had been comfortable ignoring him. Until his mother arrived. How justice wasn't just about holding one woman accountable. It was about forcing people to look in the mirror. Weeks later, Jaden stepped onto another plane. First class. His seat. This time, he didn't shrink into it. Didn't pull his hoodie up. Didn't try to disappear. He sat with his back straight, owning his space. The flight attendant approached. A different one this time. She glanced at him, at his ticket, and then a smile. Genuine. Respectful. Mr. Carter, she said. Can I get you something to drink? Jaden lifted his gaze, meeting hers. He didn't have to prove himself. Not this time. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, steady, and unapologetically strong. Yeah, he said. I'll take some water. This wasn't just about one flight. Or one slap. It was about what happens when you refuse to stay silent. Jaden Carter walked onto that plane a kid who just wanted to be left alone. He walked off it as someone who had changed the conversation forever. And if his story proved anything, it's that silence only helps the oppressor. So ask yourself, when the next injustice happens in front of you, will you sit quietly? Or will you speak? Because that choice, that's what really defines you.